Hi, I'm Bjorn, movie archaeologist, and welcome back to the Temple of Movie Reviews. Except today we're actually in the dungeon beneath the Temple of Movie Reviews, because we're reviewing Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, the new adaptation of Dungeons & Dragons that should not by any circumstances be confused with the original one. That sucks. And the one before that also sucks. This franchise doesn't have a great track record. I'm safe to say this artifact right here, that's it, it's gold plated. This is a fairly entertaining, this is a nice looking little artifact. It's actually like a golden 20-sided die. Like every hack reviewer who has ever existed would say, they rolled a nat 20 on charisma, guys. Alright, I'm going to take this hat off. I caved, by the way. I saw your comments. Everyone begging me to bring the hat back. So fine, I brought the hat back. You win. But I'm taking it off now because it messes up the green screen. So, as I said, I like this movie a lot. It's fun, it's silly, it's not Citizen Kane. You're not going into Dungeons & Dragons for the most revolutionarily mind-blowing film you've ever seen. This isn't going to rock your world. This isn't, I don't know, Seven or The Dark Knight. This isn't something like that. It's just a fun romp movie. It reminds me of Guardians of the Galaxy. I know everyone's saying that, but it really does. It feels like that. It's fun. I keep saying it's fun because that's what it is. You've got a bunch of characters together. Each one is fairly interesting. I have a few complaints, which I'll get into near the latter half of the video, one of which is about a certain character, and I think they're underutilization. So let's get the positives out of the way. The cast is really fun. Even Justice Smith, I think that's his name, the guy who was in Detective Pikachu. I don't know why he grades on me often. It's nothing against the guy personally. I just think some of the characters he plays are sort of irritating. But in this movie, I actually really enjoyed him. He plays a hapless sorcerer who's very, very bad at casting spells and has a lot of self-esteem issues. And I thought it worked. It felt just like a character that someone would create. All of these guys sort of do. You've got Chris Pine, the lovable leader, who's a very charismatic guy, except that he has like no other skills outside of that. And at several points, characters sort of question what his purpose is for being on the team. And I raised that question at a couple different points in the movie too. It works really well in that way. And his character kind of goes through that. You've got a tiefling. What is she? She's a druid, and she shapeshifts into different animals. And there's a great action sequence involving her, which I will not spoil, but involving her swapping into different animals and stuff. And it was like a really good action set piece. I really enjoyed it. Last one, I think her name is Olga, and I actually remember this because I thought that name was incredibly stupid, and I thought it was funny that they actually named a character Olga in a $100 million movie. No offense to anyone named Olga out there, don't take it personally, man. It's just a silly name in my opinion. She's like a barbarian, sort of. She was something else, and I've played a lot of D&D in my days, so I should say I'm coming at this from the perspective of a fan, but I'm also not a lore jockey. I don't snort the lore like cocaine for Dungeons & Dragons. This isn't my Game of Thrones. So if they've messed up some stuff in the lore here, I probably didn't notice it much. I will say I went and saw this with my parents. I took my parents out to the movies as being a good son, and I had advanced tickets for this, and I was like, you know what, I'll bring my parents. And so my mom pointed out, and this is interesting because she has never played D&D. Shockingly, it might surprise you to know that my mother has never played Dungeons & Dragons in her time. Pointed out that they don't really explain a lot of the magic system. They just sort of expect you to know at least the bare bones of it, and that if you knew nothing about D&D, that would be confusing, which I could point to as a negative. It didn't bother me. I know the basics of Dungeons & Dragons. If you've ever seen an isekai, you know the basics of Dungeons & Dragons. So I think most people won't have an issue with that. And in fact, I think this movie was very inclusive for people who've never played D&D. I could see people kind of easing into this movie. It's very lighthearted. It's funny, very funny. Entertaining. There's some really good action sequences. A particularly great sequence involving a portal and a heist that was really clever and inventive and really simple. Nothing was really happening except for a character walking into a place and stealing something and walking out. But the way it was executed made it like really entertaining to watch and really like exciting. I don't know how else to describe it without spoiling the movie. There's some other sequences that are really cool, specifically a fight scene in I guess you would call it like an alleyway early in the movie where you just punch 'em up fight. There's some cool magic fights in this. Lots of monsters. Not as many as I would like. That's one of my complaints. Lots of action early on that's really entertaining. One of my big complaints with this movie is the third act kind of falls apart. Not in a narrative way. I thought the narrative wraps up to the third act pretty well. The third act is just kind of anticlimactic. And I'm going to come at this with almost no spoilers. There's a big bad guy. Shocking, I know. A big bad guy in a D&D movie who's built up to this really powerful person, and they're going to have to beat him up. And then they get there to the fight, and it lasts like 4 minutes. And it's an exciting fight, but it doesn't last long enough for it to really have been the build-up. And then the movie's over. And I felt like the fights before this were significantly better. Like, it would be like if in John Wick, you built up John Wick fighting all these guys, and then the final fight is John Wick shoots 2 people, and then the movie's over. And that's the third act. That's kind of what it felt like. So the third act felt a little undercooked. I think it could have gone on a little longer. You know, this is an action-adventure movie, so I think your third act should have more action or fighting in it, or, you know, use of the characters. That being said, it's not terrible. I don't want to make this sound like it's a bad third act. It's a fine third act. I just could have used more. I think something that could be changed would be really lengthening the third act so it feels a little less anticlimactic. I worry that some people might come out of the theater thinking, oh, well, you know, there was no big fight because of the ending. I don't think that'll be the case. Marvel has kind of ruined some people for that. You know, they like to put a huge action set piece right at the end so that people remember that and not the rest of the movie. That being said, this movie is super funny and likable, and I can't imagine people won't come out of this positively. In fact, I'm gonna use my mild modicum of power to all 80 of my subscribers. Go see Dungeons and Dragons if you have even the slightest bit of interest in this. If you like funny, lighthearted adventure movies. And the reason I'm going to say that is because I am a big fan of the fantasy genre. Have been for years. I read a lot of books. I don't talk about this much on this channel, but I read books all the time. And my favorite genre is fantasy. I've read almost every major fantasy novel ever written. If you guys have got any recommendations for me, hit me down in the comments. I'm actually out of books right now. And the reason I like this genre so much is there's, like, you could do anything in it, and it's super inventive often and clever. But Hollywood has always had an issue with fantasy. Outside of The Lord of the Rings, Hollywood has done a really bad job at adapting fantasy. And that they haven't even really tried, and when they do, they treat it like it's low-budget trash, like in the 80s. So there's so many great fantasy stories out there that have never been touched, and this is not really adapting Dungeons and Dragons, i.e. there's no set story to Dungeons and Dragons, but this makes a pretty inventive and fun one. And this movie is up against the ringer at the box office. It's wedged between John Wick 4, which is better than this, I have to admit. If you have to pick one or the other, damn it all, go see John Wick. It's amazing. And the Mario movie, which I am confident will not be good. I would be very surprised if it's a good movie. It's by Illumination, and Mario does not have much in the way of story. It might look cool and have some fun references, but I don't think it'll be much more than that. I could be wrong, man. I talked shit on the Lego movie before it came out, and I ate a lot of dirt on that one. So I want this movie to do well. It's up against the odds, and it needs to turn a small amount of profit. So my 80 subscribers, go see this movie. Help it do well. Show Hollywood that you might have an interest in some of these fantasy stories, because there's some really good ones out there. And they're on the precipice of being made into movies, but they're just nervous because they're not sure that fantasy will do well at the box office. And if this movie flops, it's going to kill fantasy movies for the next 20 years. So I'm really hoping this does well. And beyond that, as I said, it's very fun. It's likable. I'm going to get into some complaints now. So you've heard my opinions of the movie. I like it. Let's get into some complaints. The CGI is bad. It's not good. This is a mixed bag because they have a lot of practical effects in this movie that look wonderful. There's this one set piece where the guy is standing on tile and it turns to sand and swallows him up. And before the screening, they played like a little vignette with all the actors, and they were talking about the practical effects, and they showed that was practical. I wouldn't have known it was practical unless they showed me that, because it was seamless. It was so nice looking. I thought, oh, that's just that polished Marvel CGI. They did it practically. They had characters fall into sand and made this fall away tile. It looked really good. And then having seen the rest of the CGI in the movie, it doesn't look great. You have your landscape shots, your cities, your fantasy vignettes. They clearly shot on location for almost everything, and it looks really good. It looks like Lord of the Rings. You know, big sweeping vistas. The cities look good. The stuff that looks bad, or like the magic, sometimes looks bad. For example, there's a scene where a guy makes a wave appear, and it pushes a boat. It looks terrible. It looks really bad. And I think they just probably didn't have the budget for it, because it's fantasy. They don't usually crank crazy budgets into these things. Probably 75 to 100 million if I had to guess for this, which it's a high budget, but it's not as high as you would think it would be. The dragon looks good. Oh, spoilers! It's a dungeon. There's a dragon in the Dungeons and Dragons movie. I'm sorry for all you at home. Uh, my second complaint: there is a character who is a tiefling. They are half human, half demon, half hobbit, half demon, something, half something, half. Oh my god, showing my knowledge here. But the tiefling character is expressed to have hate humans. Thinks that humans are vile and that they did things to her in her past, and yet she never really does anything about that. Outside mentioning it once at the beginning of the movie and saying that she doesn't think all humans are bad at the end of the movie, it's not really brought up, and I actually think it could be a very interesting thing to explore. Felt like a missed opportunity to me. And they flesh out all the characters, including her, fairly interestingly. They give the characters a lot to work with here. It's actually pretty good. There's an emotional beat at the end of the movie. I won't spoil it, but I don't think it works as well as it could have. They were really trying to make the moment a tearjerker. And in fact, there's a thing that happens during this. Okay, I'm going to, quick spoiler. Just quick spoiler. I got to talk about this. This is very quick. Skip I'll have the spoiler logo above here for all the time I'm talking about spoilers, but I'll put a timestamp on here. Skip to that timestamp if you don't want to be spoiled for the movie. If you've seen it and you're watching this later, I guess, I don't know. You can come back and hear my thoughts about this later. All right, morning you. Bye. All right, spoilers. So, there is a character called Olga, and I like her. She's pretty likable. At the end of the movie, she gets killed. I have a couple complaints with it. One, she gets stabbed by a knife like off screen. I think it would have worked better if it was like a big climactic moment, like the villain really kills her so we can see it. As it happens now, they easily defeat the villain, and then they look over and, oh my god, she's been stabbed. And that felt awkward. I felt like there was a little bit of more action set piece in the middle of there that they had to cut, maybe because they couldn't afford it or something. I don't know. I wasn't in the set. I couldn't tell you. She dies, and then obviously this amulet they've been building up the whole movie, the guy chooses to bring her back instead of his wife. And my complaints with it are twofold. One, it happens too quickly, and the death isn't really like dramatic enough for that to have happened, and he looks to his daughter for approval, which doesn't work for me because that's the daughter making the decision. I think it would have worked better if at last he sees his daughter weeping, he puts aside his own love for his wife and for once acts as a father for his daughter, like the arc they've been building up to, and sacrifices the love of his life for bringing back this Olga character. I think that would have been a much better. It's just like a little editing thing, really. And it wasn't bad as it was. I actually thought it worked really well. I saw it coming, like, as soon as she was dying, but, like, when they introduced the amulet earlier, I thought for sure he was going to bring his wife back. So I actually kind of thought that was very clever and interesting. I like it a lot. So, yeah, spoilers over. That was my one little complaint. And it was it's a half complaint, half compliment, like a backhanded compliment, you can say. Okay, so Tiefling... I'm trying to think of my other minor nitpicks with this movie. Oh, yeah, not enough creatures. We see a couple creatures, a good sequence with a maze. It's on YouTube if you want to go watch it. But beyond that, we don't really see many creatures besides the titular dragon. I think one of the things that makes Dungeons & Dragons iconic are all the weird monsters. And they were in Underdark for a part of this movie. I don't know why they then wouldn't show some of the classic monsters from those modules. I just think it was probably a budgetary thing. I hope this gets a sequel. If this does well, it gets a sequel. That would be awesome because they've set up the characters, they've set up the world, and now you can explore new nooks. Maybe focus on a villain. I'd love to see Stride in one of these things. That would be awesome. Something like that. Yeah. So I'm mostly positive. The movie is funny. It's very likable. It's kind of lighthearted and it's a family movie. Not like for kids, but like everyone will enjoy it. It's like Guardians of the Galaxy in that way. It's fun. I can't believe it. It's a good Dungeons & Dragons movie. I thought for sure this was going to be a stinker based on the just everything about it. But apparently this is the beginning of a Dungeons & Dragons universe they're going to try to launch, a TV show apparently, and a sequel if this does well. So hopefully this movie does well. I like it a lot. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. It's a fairly entertaining artifact to study. God, I hope this does well. I keep harping on this, but like if this does well, then we get like Mistborn, Stormlight, the Blade Itself trilogy, Jade City, all these other cool fantasy novels can finally get adapted. So hopefully this does well. All right, if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. If you hated Dungeons & Dragons and thought I'm an idiot, let me know below. If you're not a fantasy fan, tell me why. Tell me what you don't like about it. I always find these things sort of fun. All right, adios. I will see you on the next one.